Recording, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening. We are so lucky to have William Martin here to speak with us about his newest book, December 41, which Evening Book Group did read last year and loved. For those of you who may be looking for a book group, Evening Book Group meets on the first Monday of the month, and we are always looking for new members. Our current selection is available for checkout right now at the circulation desk, and that is The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating. We read all over the place in Evening Book Group. So without further ado, William Martin is the New York Times bestselling author of 12 novels, a PBS documentary, book reviews, magazine articles, and a cult classic horror movie too. His first Peter Fallon novel, Back Bay, established him as a master storyteller. He has been following the lives of the great and anonymous in American history ever since, taking readers from the Mayflower to Ford's Theater in The Lincoln Letter, to the South Tower on 9/11 and City of Dreams. Bound for Gold 2018 sweeps readers back to California in the legendary year of 1849 and solidifies his claim as king of the historical thriller. And his latest, the propulsive December 41, captures the atmosphere in the United States in the weeks after Pearl Harbor. He was the 2005 recipient of the prestigious New England Book Award, given to an author whose body of work stands as a significant contribution to the culture of the region. In 2015, the USS Constitution Museum gave him the Samuel Eliot Morrison Award for patriotic pride, artful scholarship, and an eclectic interest in the sea and things maritime. And in 2018, the Mystery Writers of America, New England chapter, gave him the Robert B. Parker Award. He serves on the boards of many of Boston's historical and cultural organizations, lives near Boston with his wife, and has 3 grown children. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and may we call you Bill?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for coming and for tuning in tonight. I hope I'm in focus for you, or reasonably well in focus. Welcome to my office. This is where the sausage gets made, where the books get written. Behind me, you can see some of the covers of some of my other books, including as I was saying a moment ago, the original cover by Ben Stahl for Back Bay, which is over there. And then some of the others, Cape Cod, City of Dreams, Harvard Yard, etc. The newest book is December 41, a World War II thriller, somewhat different from the kinds of books that I usually write, which are generally considered to be long chronicles that cover great spans of time. City of Dreams, for example, begins in the American Revolution in New York City and comes forward to the present. Cape Cod, of course, up there, covers 1,000 years of history from a whale stranding on Cape Cod in about 1000 AD. So I decided a long time ago that I was going to answer the challenge that some friends had put to me, which was, how about writing a book that takes place in a couple of weeks? I said, I think I have to try to do that. And so my wife and I were at the movies one day, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, watching Darkest Hour, the Darkest Hours, it's plural, with Gary Oldman playing Winston Churchill. And of course, in that movie, there is a dramatic scene about halfway through, right at the midpoint of the film, where Churchill goes downstairs and calls Roosevelt on the secure line. He goes down into a special basement room in the War Department and calls FDR. It's May of 1940. France is falling. The Germans are advancing on Dunkirk. All seems lost. Churchill tells FDR all of this and says, Mr. President, you must come into the war now. You must help us now. And Franklin Roosevelt can't do anything in May of 1940. He tells Churchill, I have done all that I can through Lend-Lease and all of the other things that I have done. My hands are tied by American politics. And at that point, Churchill hangs up the phone, slumps in despair. The camera pulls back. It is what we call in storytelling, screenwriting, novel writing, the midpoint turn where the character is facing his darkest hour, literally. And now he's going to have to find within himself some new resources in order to succeed and overcome the obstacles that have been put in front of him. And I was watching that scene and watching the camera pull back, watching Churchill's despair. And I thought to myself, in a year and a half, right after Pearl Harbor, FDR and Churchill will stand together on the south portico of the White House to light the national Christmas tree and express the unity of the American and British people in the war against fascism. And what a target they will make. And there it was. I had it. A German agent is going to try to shoot Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill on the night that they light the national Christmas tree. And that's how the story was born. I sat down with my wife over dinner and practically sketched the whole thing out. I saw the three acts, the three big pieces of the story, because every story is divided into 3 acts. And I said, now I know how to do this. Let's get rolling. And my agent, my editor liked it, and I was off and writing, hoping I could finish it in about a year. Though, as with all of my books, it took a lot longer than I had expected. I decided to begin the book, and this is a question that every writer must answer every day. Why here? Why now? What makes this particular day, this particular moment, the place at which this story begins? Figuring out how a story begins is almost as important as figuring out how it ends, because you're going to set up all of the conflicts that are out of that first scene. And of course, conflict is the heart of drama. What does the main character want, and who stands in their way? It's a question we ask every day. And I said, okay, I'm going to begin this book on December 8th, 1941, one of the world's historical days. And I worked for weeks on a scene that sketches out for every reader what is going on that day. And I imagined it like one of those famous old newsreels that some of you may remember, when you'd go to the movies and they'd run news of the world, and you'd see the globe spinning, and then the voice of Ed O'Hurley would jump in and start describing the Hindenburg or Amelia Earhart or Hitler or whatever else they were talking about. So I imagined that was how this scene would begin. Our camera is heading west, out in the far Pacific, at the international date line, the day that the line that divides yesterday from today. It's December 8th, and the camera swirls down into Tokyo, to the Emperor's Palace, where the Japanese foreign minister at about 2 a.m. on December 8th, 1941, hands to the emperor a sheet of paper. On the sheet of paper, the cessation of diplomatic relations between Japan and the United States, essentially the declaration of war. As the foreign minister says, in a half an hour, this sheet of paper will be handed to the American Secretary of State in Washington, and in an hour, the bombs will start falling at Pearl Harbor. The emperor approves. The camera picks up and heads out across Manchuria, China and Manchuria, lands which have now already been subjugated by the empire of the sun. It continues to follow the curvature of the earth as it picks up a steam train speeding out of Russia, speeding out of Siberia, speeding across the vast and empty canvas of Asian Russia, carrying troops toward the vast and incredible cataclysm that is occurring just west of Moscow, where when the camera finally reaches that point, we see the German and Russian troops in a death struggle. The German troops, representing the greatest invading army that has ever marched, have been victorious for 6 months. They are now at the gates of Moscow. They are now within sight of the onion domes of the Kremlin. Hitler has spoken of a victory parade, but on December 5th, the Russians have counterattacked with all their might and are finally, on December 7th and December 8th, pushing the Germans back for the first time. The camera picks up again and speeds out over the land that the Germans have now conquered, including Ukraine, which, of course, had welcomed the Germans because they hated the Soviets. Because of the farm collectivization of the 1930s, they had welcomed the Germans, at least the first wave of Germans, because following the first wave had come the Einsatzgruppen, the special troops who had just started shooting the intellectuals and the priests and the political leaders and the Jews, just without discrimination at all. So now the Ukrainians are against the Germans as well. The camera picks up again and heads toward East Prussia. It spins down through one of the pine forests down into the dank, dark headquarters of Adolf Hitler, the Wolfschans, his eastern headquarters for this war in Russia. And on the night of December 7th, of course, as Goebbels tells us, Hitler was in a very bad mood because he could not get over the fact that his generals weren't up to the crisis on the Eastern Front, the wintertime crisis. But then news of Pearl Harbor arrived, and Hitler perked up. His mood changed immediately. And he said, now we cannot be defeated because now we have an enemy, an ally who has not been defeated in 3,000 years. In the morning on December 8th, Adolf Hitler told Goebbels to convene the Reichstag. He was going to give a speech. Then he headed for his train and the trip back to Berlin. The camera picks up again, passes over Western Europe, now subjugated by the Germans, and lands in England, where on the night of December 7th, Winston Churchill is at Chequers, the retreat of the Prime Minister, just northwest of London. He is at the table. He is telling some sort of an anecdote when the butler comes in and whispers in his ear. Churchill immediately runs upstairs, grabs the telephone, calls Roosevelt in Washington, and says, "Mr. President, what's all this I hear about Pearl Harbor?" To which Roosevelt responded, "It's quite true, Winston. We're all in the same boat now." And as Churchill said in his memoirs later, "I went to bed that night contemplating the vast economic and military might of the United States, and I slept the sleep of the saved and thankful. England would survive." He knew what had really happened. In the morning on December 8th, he got up and told his advisors to convene Parliament because he was going to declare war on Japan in order to express solidarity with the United States. There was also a second reason for his decision to do this. He wanted America to declare war on Germany. He figured their attention would be entirely focused on Japan, but he knew, as Roosevelt did, that Germany was the real primary enemy. Our camera picks up again and crosses the Atlantic and heads for Washington, D.C., where the morning of December 8th is cold, gloomy, miserable, cloudy, misty. The camera comes down through all the ugly weather toward the White House. It heads in through the window of the White House on the second floor and picks up Arthur Prettyman, FDR's butler, as he is walking down the hallway carrying the president's wardrobe for that morning. Swallow-tailed coat, morning trousers, formal shirt, etc. Because FDR is about to declare war on Japan, and he's going to dress in diplomatic clothing. Prettyman walks into Roosevelt's bedroom, and Roosevelt is sitting up in bed with his sea cape around his shoulders. And he's holding in his hand his speech. He's editing it. I like to think on that morning that he has just made what many would say is the most famous bit of editing in the history of American rhetoric. He has crossed out the words "in world history" and written the words "in infamy." Now begins the process of getting dressed. It was a process that took an hour on a good day, because of course the president, having no muscles below his hips, needed to wear 5-pound stainless steel braces on both legs, each brace affixed to his thighs and to his hips with leather straps. Each brace hinged at the knees. When those hinges were locked, the president could give the appearance of standing upright. And he never stood in front of an audience except on his feet. And he was never photographed in any other position but on his feet or comfortably seated in a real chair. You never saw photographs of him in a wheelchair. There may only be one. And you never saw him, except maybe for once, walking without crutches. He never was seen walking with crutches. So they dress him, takes an hour, and they take him down to his car and they get him into the car. There's an urban myth that I think might be true, that the vehicle that carried Franklin Roosevelt from the White House to the Capitol on that morning was Al Capone's limousine. There was an order in Detroit, and the Lincoln Motor Plant was making 2 armored limousines for Franklin Roosevelt at the time, but neither of them was ready. And the Secret Service needed an armored car right away. So they called the Treasury Department, and the Treasury Department said, well, we got Al Capone on income tax evasion and we seized all his assets, so we do have that vehicle. So I think the story might be true. FDR gets into the vehicle, 3 Secret Service agents on each running board, only wearing their suit jackets, no heavy overcoats, because of course, if something goes wrong, they have to reach quickly into their shoulder holsters and pull out their weapons. They head down Pennsylvania Avenue, which is lined with people, all very quiet, lined with soldiers every 5 feet. Every manhole cover has been welded shut. Every security measure has been taken. One contemporary report suggests that it is the most tense and nervous atmosphere in Washington, D.C. since the day that Abraham Lincoln traveled down Pennsylvania Avenue in 1861 to take the first oath of office. FDR gets to the Capitol. The car pulls in under the Capitol into a special entrance for the president, so he could not be viewed being lifted from the vehicle into his wheelchair. He is taken up to the Speaker's office, and then he gets ready to give his speech. And that is now where the book begins, because everything else that I've just told you, I cut out of the book. I did that because I wanted to get the story kicked into action more quickly. And so it begins now with the words, "It was the largest radio audience in history. On the cold coast of Maine, they were listening. Down on Wall Street, they were listening. In Detroit, workers on the assembly lines took an early lunch so that they could listen. In Kansas and Nebraska, and all the places where farmers, well, okay, I'm going to stop because my memory of it Here, let me read it. I was trying to pull it out of my memory bank here. It was the largest radio audience in history. On the cold coast of Maine, they were listening. Down on Wall Street, trading stopped so they could listen. On assembly lines in Detroit, they were taking long lunches so the auto workers could listen. In Chicago, the butchers stopped slaughtering in the stockyards to listen. In Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa, where they grew corn and wheat enough to feed the world, now that the rains had returned and the dust had stopped blowing, the farmers were listening there too. In all the places where the muscle and sinew of America bound one state or town or family to another, they were listening for the warm baritone and patrician inflections that somehow never sounded too upper crusty coming out of the radio. Because America had awakened that morning to the cold reality of war, war in every time zone, war encircling the earth, war once more as the original human fact. Well, that's December 8th. The voice of Franklin Roosevelt travels out across America and finally reaches Southern California. And that's where the novel really begins. It begins in a place that I had read about, that I really wanted to write about from the first time that I read it, long before I saw that movie. It's a place called the Murphy Ranch. If you drive out Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, out to Pacific Palisades, once you reach the point where the Riviera Country Club is on your left, go to the right, drive up the hill, drive around onto the Fire Road. You know, and it's a very rich neighborhood. Steven Spielberg lives up there now. Drive around onto the Fire Road, and down in a deep canyon is a compound that was built by fascist sympathizers in the 1930s, a place called the Murphy Ranch. They had built a fence around it, a 55-acre fence that's still there. And so are fuel tanks, water tanks, power stations, roads, and two 300-foot long staircases that lead down into the bottom of this canyon. And I had always wanted to write about it. And I decided that I would write about it in December 41. And this was perfect because the FBI raids this fascist camp where various groups that were active in Los Angeles, the Friends of the New Germany, the German American Bund, the Ku Klux Klan, the Silver Shirt League, all of these groups, where they were all operating in the open, but they would drill down there in that canyon and in other places on a weekly basis, preparing for something that was to be called Der Tag, the day when the Germans and all of their fascist sympathizers would rise up and start shooting the wrong people in this country and start putting the right people into power. FBI, the day after Pearl Harbor, arrests everybody down there, except for one guy who gets away. And he's the guy they should have caught, because he's the guy whose job it's going to be to get to Washington and shoot Franklin Roosevelt on the night that he lights the national Christmas tree. That's how the story gets started. And it takes off from there. You will be, in the first third of the book, submerged in the Los Angeles of the time. With the Germans, you will see the German Bund Hall on Figueroa and 14th Street, where today you will find the Staples Center. The Bund Hall welcomed any Aryan visitor. You walked into the foyer, and on your left was the Aryan bookstore, where they sold German cookbooks, German literature, and any amount of anti-Semitic literature you might hope to have. On your right was the Gaststube, the restaurant, where there were checkered tablecloths and great steins of beer. And on the wall, there was a pushpin map tracing the movement of the German armies across Europe. And directly in front of you was an auditorium where they celebrated all kinds of German holidays, and of course, the Fuhrer's birthday. And there are photographs of this. In fact, I might even have one here. This is one of the advantages of being at my desk rather than in front of a podium. Let's see if you can see that. See it? That picture right there. This is a book called Hitler in Los Angeles, and that is a celebration of the Fuhrer's birthday in the Bund Hall, right on the site of where the Lakers play today. And that was in 1940. And this hall was also raided by the FBI that night and was also shut down. So you have that going on in Los Angeles at the beginning of the book. And there's another reason that I chose December 8th to start the book, because not only is it a World Historical Day, it is also a day that is very significant in the history of American popular culture. Because on December 8th, at Warner Brothers, the mailbag arrived, the overnight or the weekend mailbag from New York, containing books and plays that the story editor in New York thought might make good movies. One of the plays that arrived that day that was assigned to a young would-be writer to make a report on was a play called Everybody Comes to Rick's, which of course would become the movie Casablanca in just a year. And when I read that, I said, it's perfect. Casablanca is going to become the greatest war movie made during World War II, even though only 2 or 3 shots are fired in the whole movie. I just have to have this in here. And one of my characters, the good guy in the story, in fact, is an aspiring Hollywood screenwriter. And he's going to get into all kinds of trouble that I won't go into here. But I tried in the book not to capture any kind of parallels of the Casablanca plot, but to capture one of the thematic ideas. Because in this book, you're going to meet a lot of people who are going to try, in whatever way possible, they're going to try to stop that German agent, sometimes even unwittingly. And it reminds me of the scene in Casablanca, the scene where Bogey has just met Ilsa, Ingrid Bergman, in her appearance in Casablanca, and she's now taken off with her husband. The cafe is now closed. Bogey is sitting in the shadows with the bourbon bottle. Sam is in the background tinkling on the piano. Bogart says to him, "Sam, it's December 1941, Casablanca. What time is it in New York?" And Sam says, I don't know, my watch has stopped. And Bogey says, "I bet they're asleep in America, in New York. I bet they're asleep all over America." And that idea is planted at that point, which is that Bogart is the rest of the movie is going to be a process of his awakening to his new responsibilities in the fight against fascism. And that's really what happens in my novel as well, as all these characters with all of their dreams of Hollywood success or getting a job in Washington, which is what's driving the FBI agent that's in the book. All of them are going to have to put their dreams on hold in order to get that Nazi and stop him, in order to be small cogs in the very large wheel of American democracy. And that's really what the story is all about. And that's why I just loved using the story of Casablanca in this book. There's one more reason that I chose December 8th, however, and that one is that on December 8th, as I mentioned before, Churchill immediately starts thinking about how to get to Washington, how to get into Roosevelt's head to persuade Roosevelt to turn on the Germans. Because when Roosevelt gives that speech on December 8th, he never mentions the Germans. America is enraged at the Japanese. And so it will be at the Japanese that we turn our full fury for the moment. And he knows when Churchill asks him, shouldn't I come to Washington so that we can have a discussion on all the large issues of the war? He knows what Churchill's after. And he puts him off for a day or so. But on Tuesday, FDR gives a fireside chat. And, we like to think that he was giving fireside chats every week, but he only gave 52 of them in 12 years of his presidency. And in this particular one, on that Tuesday night, which would be December 9th, he says at the end of it, it would ill behoove us to defeat the Empire of Japan, only to turn and find that Germany and Italy were in charge of the rest of the world. And so he's softening up the American people for what is about to come. And later in the week, he begins to relent. Churchill keeps up the telegrams and the notes, the imprecations and the implorings to allow him to come to Washington. And then on December 11th, Hitler takes care of everything. He declares war on the United States. Nobody can figure out why. Not then, not now. His general staff had not even planned for war with America. But Hitler basically said, we're in a de facto war with America, so let us strike first with our own declaration. Well, the next day, Churchill began his journey. Took the train to Scotland. On Saturday morning in Scotland, he boarded a British battleship and began an Atlantic crossing that would take 10 days, or what he wrote to his wife would be the 10 worst days of the war. Seasickness, heavy seas, boredom, difficulty of communication with the War Department in London, all of that was going on during this trip, in which Churchill would dose himself with Mother Sill's seasick remedy. Some of his staff would get sick. Some of his staff would suffer broken bones when they fell on the pitching decks of the vessel. Churchill would entertain himself at night watching Hollywood movies and reading C.S. Forester novels. Finally, the ship arrived at the Virginia Capes on the morning, or approached the Virginia Capes in the afternoon of December 22nd, 1941. And Churchill said, I can't wait another day, because it was going to take about a day to work the battleship up the Chesapeake and then get Churchill to Washington. He said, I need an airplane right away. And so they got him a plane down at the Norfolk Naval Air Base, and they put aboard that plane Churchill, Tommy Thompson, his bodyguard, Lord Moran, his physician, and Lord Beaverbrook, his chief advisor. Plane takes off for the 1-hour journey to Washington, D.C. And as it's traveling north, they all look out the windows. Remember, it's just about this time of year. The dark comes very early. They're looking out the windows and they're seeing something that they have not seen in 2 years. Churchill asks Tommy Thompson, what do you think? And Tommy Thompson says, I see lights. But more than lights, I see freedom. I see hope. And that was what they had come to America to experience, that sense of hope and freedom, renewed, revived, and ultimately fulfilled in the defeat of Germany 4 years later. So they land in Washington. FDR is waiting for them. FDR and Churchill have a meeting. They go up to the White House, and on the front lawn of the White House, a photograph is taken, a famous photograph, which you can see on my Facebook page if you want to go looking for it, or on my website. A famous photograph in which Churchill's and Roosevelt's in the middle. One of his naval aides is on one side helping him to stand, and Churchill is beside him on the other side. The world was shocked. They could not have imagined that Churchill had crossed the Atlantic immediately as soon as the war started in order to be at Roosevelt's side. And there he was on December 22nd. And they had meetings for 2 or 3 days, all kinds of great stories about all of that. And on the night of December 24th, they they both appear on the south portico to light the national Christmas tree. And out in that crowd is a German agent. My guy, he's made it across the country, and my heroes are chasing him. And well, you know that they will catch him, but who lives and who dies is what makes this, I think, a suspense thriller that you will really enjoy. And so, with that, I will happily answer any questions you might have. Um, so, turn on the sound, see if anybody has anything for me.
Thank you, Bill. Also, please feel free to put your questions in the chat if you'd need to,
Okay,
and I can read them out to Bill.
good.
Um, and then maybe just while we're waiting for some folks to type, um, Bill, one of the questions from the book group when we read it, I
Yeah.
think was was the writing style a departure from your normal writing style, and was that difficult to achieve?
Well, the actual style, the way the story is told, that wasn't difficult at all. I find it very easy to drop into a narrative voice that in some way echoes the time in which I am writing. And so it was kind of easy to get that 1940s patois in there, the kind of, wisecracking film noir sort of dialogue, and uh, the descriptions that I read a lot of Raymond Chandler. Nothing worse than bad Raymond Chandler imitations, but I thought I got a pretty good sense of that whole world in the prose itself. And the larger stylistic aspect, of course, is that, as we said earlier, the story is 2.5 weeks. That's the beginning to an end. And most of my other books go back and forth in time and cover long spans of time. So those are harder than this. Writing a book that covers 2.5 weeks is easier than writing a book that covers 1,000 years in time. Believe me, it's true. So, from Jane Dykstra, is anyone using the Murphy Ranch in California? Oh, where the Nazi sympathizers used to meet. Um, right now, the Murphy Ranch, which you can visit if you want, and I just described for you where to go to see it. Um, there's a sign from LA County when you get up there in the hills uh, above the expensive suburbs and houses. Um, no trespassing, but nobody pays attention to the signs. They just walk along the road, and the break in the chain link fence. There are the two staircases I've described. Go down the staircase. Everything down there, all of the poured concrete tanks and powerhouse and the terraced gardens and all of the other things are all covered in graffiti. At one point, it was an artist's colony. Then it became a kind of a hippie hangout. And somewhere along the line, LA basically shut it all down. But people are down there all the time. We went down and visited. We went down and walked around down there, and I was able to describe it and to feel the vibes. The one thing that I didn't do was go to the UCLA archives, where they have the blueprint that was commissioned by the people who owned the property, fascist sympathizers who owned the property. And I guess one of their aunts was named Murphy. That's why they used the term Murphy Ranch. Um, they commissioned a famous Los Angeles architect of the time, a guy who was actually African American, which I don't think the Nazis knew about when they hired him. Uh, They commissioned him to design a 40-room mansion that was to have been Hitler's Western White House once the war was over. And they were going to build it down in there. Of course, they never even broke ground on that, but the plans still exist, and you can find them in the UCLA archives. Anything else?
Let's see. Please feel free to unmute or keep putting things in the chat. Oh, George, do you have a question? Oh, no. Oh, George, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello.
You started the book description with Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. Did you end the book at all mentioning Japan, or was it all the war in Europe?
No, once I had moved away from that event, I just focused on the characters,
Okay.
the German characters. I referenced in a few places the Japanese community in Los Angeles, the fishing community at Terminal Island. Right after the war begins, of course, all of the prisoners that they're rounding up across LA are being taken to the federal holding pen on Terminal Island, and that's still there. Terminal Island is in Long Beach. Well, also part of the Terminal Island land mass was a large Japanese tuna fishing fleet, and they were great citizens, and they had a cannery and everything else. All of them would end up 6 months later off there in that internment camp in the Owens Valley. And also some of the characters in the book who are in the FBI have throughout the 1940s been tracking the Japanese. Certain Japanese, everybody knew stuff, trouble was coming. And so they were watching, say, the Japanese naval attaché in Los Angeles, whose hotel room they raided. And I referenced this in the book. And they found in his hotel room a big book, a big compendium of names of Japanese and Japanese American nationals. And they provided a list in this particular compendium of all the Japanese who wouldn't turn against the United States. And I thought that was interesting. I put that little detail into the book. But the larger issues of the war in the Pacific, which I touched on in a novel called Annapolis many years ago, the larger issues are things that I really don't get very close to in this book.
Yeah, good. Good.
Not my
Thank you very
intention.
much.
Yeah,
thank
you. Thank you.
Yeah, terrific story. Yeah.
Thank you. So if there's nothing else, I will sign off just telling you that, well, you will enjoy this book. Am I in the process of writing a new book? And if so, any hints about the subject? I'm working on another one that brings back the main characters of this book, or at least those that are left standing at the end of the book. And it's called Chain Reaction. And it's also set in the 1940s. And so you might begin to get a sense that of what it's about just from the title, if you give it some thought. My wife and I did some interesting research trips around the Southwest last spring, including a couple of nights in Los Alamos. So stay tuned for that one. I'll have it out. I'm not quite sure when, but after that, I'm probably going to write the last book in the Peter Fallon series, which began with Back Bay. And I hope to have it out before 2080, maybe considerably earlier than that, because 2080 is the 50th anniversary of the publication of Back Bay. So those are my short-term and long-term plans at the moment. And I think if you read December 41, you'll enjoy the book. And before you read it, go on my website. My website, the first page of the website has a historical timeline. Part of the timeline is to show you various YouTube videos of various historical events that are going on in the 1940s. The invasion of Russia, Churchill on the battleship crossing the Atlantic, Glenn Miller and the orchestra playing Chattanooga Choo Choo, which was the number one song on the Billboard charts on December 7th, 1941. And a remarkable video of Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill on December 24th, lighting the national Christmas tree. The camera's right here, right next to them. They are whispering to one another. Do you want to speak? Do you want to speak? You see them totally ignoring the camera, giving their speeches. FDR says, "And now for the 9th time, I light the living community Christmas tree of the United States of America." He gives his speech, then he invites Churchill to give a few words. And Churchill gives a resounding speech which ends, "So let the little children have their night of fun and laughter. Let the gifts of Father Christmas delight their play. Let us grown-ups join to the full in their unstinting pleasure before we return to the stern task and formidable year that lies ahead. Resolved that by our efforts, those same children shall not be robbed of their inheritance or denied their right to live in a free and peaceful world. And so, in God's good grace, a happy Christmas to you all and good night."
Thanks very much, Bill.
Those words echoed around America and echoed around the world. And when you read the book, remember that if not for my fictional characters stopping that Nazi out there in the crowd, Churchill might never have gotten to say those words. And that's what I want you to think as you're reading the book. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and nice to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Right.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.